So thank you everyone for coming. We're going to get started. There's still going to be some people trickling in, but want to be conscious of everyone's time. My name is Mike. I'm a second-year full-time MBA student here at UCLA Anderson. Thanks all for coming today. Because this is our first event, I want to give a quick preview into what will be happening today, tomorrow, and Thursday. Tonight, we have a documentary screening of David Attenborough's Breaking Boundaries here at Anderson. Tomorrow afternoon, we have two panels, one on impact investing here in the afternoon, and a panel and networking reception on food sustainability in the evening. That will be at BioscienceLA, an amazing impact-focused biotech incubator in Culver City that is run by an Anderson alum. On Thursday, we have a fireside chat with Tom Vazo, the CEO of Homeboy Industries, one of LA's most well-known nonprofits, followed by a panel on building better, impactful organizations. There's going to be food and drinks at all events, so please register on our website and stop by for all that you're interested in. Today's panel is on social impact consulting and the role that external change makers play in making an impactful influence on leaders in both the nonprofit and for-profit space. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Professor Gayle Northrop. Gayle is one of our very own professors here at UCLA Anderson, where she teaches social entrepreneurship and impact consulting classes to both MBA and undergraduate students. She's the president of Northrop Nonprofit Consulting, a consulting firm dedicated to strategy and development of social impact organizations worldwide. Gayle is also adjunct faculty at the University of Cape Town Graduate School of Business in South Africa, where she has spent considerable time leading nonprofits to strengthen health systems and improve health outcomes. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Gayle.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all for joining us today. This is super exciting. I am going to do my best to give as much airtime as possible to our amazing panelists. If you want to hear more about me, my consulting work, come to office hours, take my social impact consulting class. I will point out that our social impact consulting class here at UCLA Anderson has become exceedingly popular. We have 60 students taking the class this quarter, working with 12 nonprofit organizations on some super impactful projects. So that's a little plug for our social impact consulting work and class. So basically, I want to be these people when I grow up. And I'll tell you why, and then they'll tell you more about why that is. So our panelists have extensive experience in social impact consulting. First is Jenny Lee Shen. Jenny is senior partner and co-founder of Garnet. Garnet has been in this space for 20 years now, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that. And I would just point out the differences between the different firms that are represented here today. Mine is a sole proprietorship. Garnet is a private for-profit consulting firm that is B certified. If you don't know what B certified is, I see a couple heads nodding. Really important, rigorous evaluation and assessment and acknowledgement of the company's commitment to social governance and environmental responsibility. So in a minute, I will have each of the panelists introduce themselves. Next is Devon Dickau. Devon is senior manager and DEI leader at Deloitte. You might be familiar with Deloitte. Major for-profit private consulting firm, which also does extensive work in social impact, pro bono work, as well as diversity, equity, inclusion. So welcome to Devon. And then Aviva Altmann. Aviva is a principal at the Bridgespan group, a real leader in this space. As we were discussing in our prep, so many of us in the social impact space are reliant on and lean to the Bridgespan group to show us what's promising, what are best practices, and lead the way in terms of thought leadership in this space. So, and Bridgespan is a nonprofit. So we have all different types of social impact consulting firms represented here. With that, I'm going to turn it over to each of the panelists to take a minute to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their career pathway, and a little bit about the social impact consulting work that they do. So first, Jenny.
All right. Hi there. Okay, so a bit about myself, and then I'll talk a little bit about my social impact journey, and then I might say a little bit about Garnet so you know who we are. I am a problem solver by nature and by nurture. I'm also a daughter of immigrants, and my family has benefited from pursuing the American dream. We have realized and benefited from education being a great equalizer in our society. Also, I'm a student of our great democracy. I aspire to the ideals of it, but I know very well that the practice of it falls short. And where it falls short, there are cracks and gaps. And it's where injustices and inequities are really experienced by vulnerable people and communities. And so, combining all that together, I've dedicated my professional career to doing what I do best, which is being a problem solver, being a critical thinker, and a developer of people, while working on social justice issues. I'm a wife to Tony Shen, who is an Anderson alumnus, and a mother of 4, and I have 2 of my daughters here today with me. So how I ended up in social impact consulting is kind of a bit of a circuitous route. It started when a mentor introduced me to TCC Group, which still exists and works with nonprofits, foundations, and corporations. And I got to, as a young punk, really, out of college, who really was like, how am I a consultant? What am I supposed to do? But my clients were the Ford Foundation, Coca-Cola Foundation, Pfizer, a little hair here, sorry, pharmaceuticals. And I really got to see, and even the Children's Defense Fund. And so I got to see passionate individuals across sectors working in a very resource-constrained world. And so I was acutely aware that I needed some more skills. And so I actually spent a small bit of time in grant making after that at the Fannie Mae Foundation, and then ended up at Yale School of Management for my MBA. Because at the time, and it continues to be, sorry, UC Anderson, it has a history, and its mission is to educate leaders for business and society. After Yale, I'll try to make this quick, another mentor of mine introduced me to just the idea that, Jenny, go get some experience, go do something. I really wanted to get to the work of social change, and she said, you can do that. Think of your career as longer than just the next job. And so I ended up and had the fortune to work at the Boston Consulting Group, where it was a crucible of learning, for sure. And I got to pay off some of my student loans. That was practical. And then I wanted to get back to the work of social change. And at the time, it was post 9/11. And my best friend from college, who was at Booz Allen Hamilton at the time, she and I just serendipitously, at the same time and place, or as I like to think of it, it was a God thing, just put us together and we said, let's start a firm. What do we do well? Problem solve? What do we care about? Social change? Let's put it together. And at the time, Bridgespan did not yet exist, FSG did not yet exist, and so we became accidental entrepreneurs. I'll just, last bit about Blue Garnet. We are a boutique, local, woman-owned social impact consulting firm. We get to work with leaders and walk alongside them as they pursue social change, and create the combined power of business acumen and their passion for social impact. I think that's
great.
That's
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah.
Devon.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here. Devon, Dickau, he, him pronouns. I am a double Bruin. I met Aviva, actually. We went to undergrad together here. So we're double Bruins, although we did not go to Anderson at the same time. But my activism journey really started in undergrad at UCLA. I knew I probably wanted to go into the social impact space in some way. Actually, no one in my nuclear family went into the corporate sector, so I never thought of going corporate as an option for my career. It was public service or a nonprofit or something like that. My sisters are both in healthcare. I came to UCLA and discovered Dance Marathon, which is the organization that Aviva and I met doing HIV/AIDS activism, and that really propelled my career journey. I volunteered for a nonprofit in Tanzania right after graduation, and then came back, and after studying literature and film at UCLA, I had planned to go into the film industry. Oh, my voice just changed. And I decided instead to go into education. I had this life-changing experience working abroad where I had the opportunity to reflect and recenter myself. And also as a queer person, I had to hide a key aspect of my identity in my very first job after college. And that really was an impactful, integral moment for my career as well. Came back, worked in education for UCLA, helped start some programs focused on marginalized groups, and decided I needed to go to grad school to figure out what my next step was. So I got a master's in education focused on the nexus of media technology and social justice at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I really spent my time at Harvard researching how social media could be used for good. I think we have seen now that it has been used for bad as well. It has had great impact on our world, but in my grad thesis was basically studying Twitter and YouTube and Facebook as these new emerging social impact, social justice platforms. I also interned for PBS when I was in Boston to see if maybe public TV was my jam, and it wasn't, but I got introduced to a social impact consulting firm that had done a lot of work and still does a lot of work with PBS and its affiliates back here in LA. My husband and I were doing long distance. I moved back to LA because he works in entertainment, and I got my dream job. I got my dream job working at the intersection between the entertainment industry and social change in the social impact consulting space. This firm had 9 people, so boutique, and I was paid $36,000 a year, and I had a lot of debt. And after a few years working in my dream job, 80 hours a week, doing really amazing things, I got to meet Oprah and work with Lady Gaga and work on some really cool films. It was awesome, and I was poor. And I was also realizing that in conversations that my team and I were having with the corporate sector, we were not speaking the same language. We wanted to create change. The corporate sector worked within the system of capitalism, and I did not have the vocabulary to work within the system of capitalism. And so I decided to apply to business school so I could learn why businessy people do what businessy people do. I studied literature and film in undergrad and hadn't taken math since I was 15. So it was time to become business fluent. And of course, I get involved in Net Impact when I was here. I found the 13 other folks my year that were passionate about that. Talked to Aviva a lot, actually, about the decision to come to business school, and discovered big consulting as a potential way for me to learn why businessy people do what businessy people do. So I was going to go to one of the big consulting firms for 2 years, and actually wrote my essay for Anderson about CSR. I thought corporate social responsibility, that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to work within corporations, but be the social justice warrior. And I got the offer from Deloitte. I actually deferred it. So I spent 7 months after I graduated, after a lot of social impact work while a student, deciding whether or not I was really going to do this. I felt conflicted, like I was selling out to the man. And I volunteered and I traveled and I meditated a lot. And 7 months after I graduated, I started at Deloitte with the mission of infiltrating capitalism and dismantling it from the inside. And so that is what I've done for the last 7.5 years at Deloitte. Doing my very best, at least. They're still employing me, so I guess so far, so good. I came to Deloitte and I decided that I was only going to do work that fulfilled my personal values and that allowed me to pursue my definition of social justice. So I am unabashedly a social justice warrior working within corporate America and the global corporate world. My clients are the Fortune 500 mostly, and I help them with diversity, equity, inclusion strategy, ESG strategy, sustainability work increasingly. I am doing social justice work, and by the way, I paid off all my student debt, and I feel so lucky that I now am on kind of the other side of the social impact consulting world, but I can lean on this company with a global footprint. We have over 300,000 people around the world, so there's every type of expertise you can think of, and we can help the most influential organizations in the history of civilization do better. And so that's what I get to do every day, is help these big organizations do better.
Awesome. Thank you. Aviva.
Well, what a privilege to be on this panel. Gayle started by saying she wants to be us when we grow up, but it's funny because I'm in this job because I wanted to be Gayle when I grew up. And every single person here on this panel is part of the reason why I'm here today. So I think you can see that, like, we as a community of social impact people have to help each other in order to achieve all of our goals. And so I just feel very privileged and lucky to be here alongside all of you. So my career really started similarly to Devon. We were undergraduates here at UCLA, and as he said, working on HIV/AIDS activism. And it was a rare opportunity to actually start and run our own student organization. It was an organization of 100 student volunteers that had a corporate structure of a president and executive directors and leaders of different areas, and we put on a 26-hour-long dance marathon to raise money for pediatric AIDS research. You can talk to us later about how crazy we are. We probably are. But it was just such a joy and really unlocked something that you can see in both me and Devon, where it was like, this is what we have to do in our lives. And so following that, I've had the privilege of being able to do many different things in the social impact space, starting after college working for a local charter school management organization here in Los Angeles called Green Dot Public Schools, where my first boss was Jenny's husband. He took a risk on me and hired this fresh out of undergrad person to help with development. So I was grant writing mostly, and in grant writing, really putting together strategies for the ways that Green Dot could help to advance educational equity in Los Angeles. Then had the privilege of getting to start and run the after-school programs for the network and built those out over a few years. Then I came to Anderson because I was doing the entrepreneurial thing that Jenny was doing, and I think many of us who work in the nonprofit space know it's the kind of space where there's lots of opportunity. If you have energy and drive and you want to do something, they're like, great, here's the keys, go have fun. But the problem is there's no support. And so I was a 24-year-old building out this system, and I didn't know how to do it. And so similarly to Devon, really felt like maybe if I just knew accounting, I would be better at this job. No. But I came to business school to find out. And the good thing was I learned in business school that I had all of the skills that I needed, and I got to build a wonderful community with people like the ones here on this panel. And really importantly, for those of you who are Anderson students, I worked on an AMR project my second year, focused on microfinance in Uganda, and Gayle was my advisor. And so that was how I got to know her and build this wonderful relationship. And she inspired me to be able to work after business school for 1 year at Johnson & Johnson and their corporate philanthropy team. And then I came to Bridgespan, and I've been here 9 years now. I found Bridgespan because actually when I was working at Green Dot, I kind of became the person who was like, oh, there's a really hard project? We don't have anybody lying around who can do it, but we'll just throw it to Aviva. As I think most consultants probably have the experience of doing. There was a major initiative under the President Obama administration around an idea called the Promised Neighborhoods. Where the idea was to replicate a model from the Harlem Children's Zone in New York to say, what are kind of a series of blocks of neighborhoods that we want to make sure we're infiltrating with all of the different resources that you need to succeed at every critical outcome from birth through age 18 to eventually be able to go to college and then graduate from college. And so there was a big competitive process, and I led the process at Green Dot to develop a promised neighborhood in the Watts area of Los Angeles. And in doing that, I had one tool, actually, which was much more tools than I typically had in my daily work, and it was a report that was published by Bridgespan. So I joke that it was my Bible, and I slept on it because I was like, I need a plan. This is my only plan. And so really came to love and appreciate Bridgespan's work and ability to be thought leaders in the space, and importantly, to be able to give nonprofit leaders a real resource that is practical and useful, and that I could understand. I often find that lots of reports that come out from other firms might be hard or full of jargon or hard to actually figure out, how do I make this practical? And so that's what I really loved about Bridgespan. So I've been at Bridgespan now for 9 years, and happy to share more as we keep going.
That's great, and we do. I mean, those of us in this sector, as I said, really rely on those reports and the leadership there. So I hope you heard some themes in their introductions: the role of mentors, the role of creating and being in community, the power of activism and social justice. That's a theme and a thread through all of our work.
Gayle mentioned at the beginning that Bridgespan is a nonprofit organization. So we offer fee-for-service strategy consulting services to both nonprofit organizations and philanthropies. Those are our major clients. But what really makes us a nonprofit, above and beyond our work with nonprofits, is that we publish and share our learnings from our work to the entire field. And we want to create impact in that way through thought leadership, elevating the best ideas and practices that we see so that it can actually influence the broader sector. But that all comes from that consulting work. So we are strategy consultants. I can share a quick example of one of the types of ways that we work with clients, because I think there's many different ones and it can seem kind of vague. So one example, I worked with a large reproductive health philanthropist a few years ago. It was 2019, and the reproductive health funder knew that Roe versus Wade was likely to fall. And they were developing their strategy for how to give hundreds of millions of dollars over the next few years. And they were needing actually to spend down their total amount of money. And so they said, what are the highest impactful ways that we can give this money right now? You can imagine that was quite a decision to make. It was a really interesting journey. They played with different ideas from, should we build an underground railroad for people to get them out of red states into blue states where they can get access to abortion care? But quickly, when thinking about the size and scale of infrastructure required to do that, realized that wasn't really an option. And so then it was a question of how do we confront this issue? And the leader of the funding organization was a woman who had worked in this space for 30 years, brilliant academic, had many, many years of research and experience, and had worked on the Hill to influence policymakers, could call up Joe Biden whenever she wanted to, could call up academics at UCSF and talk to them about the latest research coming out. She had no shortage of opportunities to influence reproductive health practitioners. And she brought in Bridgespan, who did not have a lot of depth of expertise in reproductive health. And so at first there were some clashes. She said, what do you guys know? You guys don't know reproductive health like I do. And we said, you're right, we don't. But what we did know is how to develop a good strategy and how to especially think about who are the populations that you really seek to center and elevate in order to ensure that your work advances equity. And so what we helped them to do was to rethink their approach. They had been so focused on advancing change within the reproductive health system that they actually were failing because they kept coming up against the same barriers every single time. What were those barriers? Racism, patriarchy, capitalism. The same barriers that everyone faces, that every time they'd get a good bill through, even if they got it through, someone else would just strike it down, and that would end access for people. And so they went through this journey of feeling like this is an urgent moment for us, and they had to say, we're gonna let go of that urgency, and we're gonna think, we're in this for the long haul. Roe's gonna fall. If Roe falls, what are the most impactful things that we can do? And they came to the realization that they gotta fight racism. So that was one story that I'd be happy to share, but maybe I'll pass to you.
Yeah.
There's a frequent conversation in the consulting field, a joke, I would say, of consulting. What is it? It's nothing and everything at the same time. What is actually consulting? I think consulting is helping our clients, whoever they might be, solve problems that they can't solve themselves. It might be because of the smarts and the knowledge. It might be because they don't have the team or the bandwidth or the people. They might need to accelerate the timeline of something. There could be a variety of reasons, but we're coming in to help them solve something, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 6 years, maybe longer, but some sort of problem they can't help solve themselves. What are those problems? I think for a social impact consultant, most people at Deloitte would not describe what I do as social impact consulting. That's not an oft-used term. I do, and I talk about it this way because every single thing that I do with one of my clients is in pursuit of social justice. And I think that is part of the definition of social impact consulting. Me bringing the lens of my world, my work to every type of client problem, every business problem is critical to ensuring social justice or furthering social justice as this ideal. The bar keeps raised higher and higher from year to year. But in a place like Deloitte, my clients are asking Deloitte to help them solve a, quote, business problem. And while we in this room might think that the social, moral, ethical imperative of simple human dignity and respect in the pursuit of justice might be enough, like shouldn't it just be enough to treat all people equitably? And shouldn't we do things because people deserve to be treated equitably? Corporations don't make decisions based on that reason. And so I'm helping my clients, in most cases, build a case for change that aligns with both the ethical, moral imperative and a business imperative. And I don't often use the phrase business case. I like case for change instead. But what is the case for change that bridges those two, brings it together so that it makes sense? It makes sense for us to do more good than harm. And so I would say, in short, social impact consulting is mitigating the harm and ultimately trying to get net positive good. A lot of my clients are doing harm. They're creating they're contributing to the systemic inequities that have caused the moment that we're in today. They have created this moment, and they're benefiting from it. We are benefiting from it as part of capitalism. And it's my role and responsibility then as a social impact consultant to help at least a little bit tip the balance towards a little bit net good than bad. How can I mitigate the bad and create a little more good? And that's a big thing, if I can do just a little bit.
Yeah.
Can I add something? I guess I'm good. Okay. I would just add also, right, there's consulting and social impact consulting. And so at Blue Garnet, we start with the end in mind. We say that a lot. Well, what is the end? It's actually sometimes harder than you think to figure that out. So we start with the end in mind, and then we help our clients ask and answer the so what question, right? So 2 words, so what? So what you've been around for 40 years? So what you've set up a network of 8 schools in this neighborhood? So do you know how, like, the change, like, can you measure it? Like, what is the change in the world? Think of it as a lever. What is that change? And then how do we articulate with clarity that North Star, right? Build shared leadership through inclusive practices, have healthy economics. So, because you want to do more than you can afford. So we have to balance that, and then actually keep accountable for results. This is a little bit differently. My clients don't tend to be the huge corporations because typically there's a nonprofit mission in mind. That has to be your North Star. And guess what? There's a myth that you can't measure it. We'll just write these mission statements that are just like these lofty ideas. But we all know in the corporate space, if it's not measured, it is not going to get done. And so I think I would just add to what you said, how important it is to start with the end in mind. And there's a lot of myth busting that I do with my clients. And oftentimes, even before they become a client, I'm testing to see if they want those myths busted. And if they do, then it might be a good fit, because they're asking the right questions. So, yeah.
Well, that is such a rich definition and description of social impact consulting. I was going to go so simplistic in my thoughts, but maybe I can take us there for a moment and then come back to your level of brilliance. So we heard about problem solving, partnering with client organizations, obviously a social justice and equity lens, myth busting, and creating a case for change. Also, social impact consulting tends to have an entry point of doing some kind of process resulting in some kind of end product, whether it's strategy, evaluation, board development, organization or leadership development. So I'm curious if any of you want to speak to the work that your consulting firms focus on, part of it being functional, operational, helping build organizations, perhaps, but also part of it perhaps being building social impact leaders, building more social justice warriors, build beyond the organization bounds, or even to something we all in this space talk about a lot, which is changing or dismantling unjust systems. So love to hear there's the consulting work that we do of strategic planning or evaluation, but there's also the broader impact that I think all of your firms are having. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
I can start. The corporate space tends to be 1 to 2 decades behind the nonprofit and academic worlds when it comes to things like systems thinking around social impact and theory of change. But I do think corporations are getting there, and an approach we've been taking in the past few years particularly is to encourage our clients to think of even just the business itself as a system that exists within an ecosystem of many different businesses and stakeholders, including customers and suppliers and business partners and broader society as well, and understand all the levers that they can pull and how those levers are intersecting with one another. If I pull this lever in terms of how I attract talent, how is that going to impact my ability to create products that are more equitable and vice versa, and how do all of those things intersect? My clients as leaders are usually influencers within their organizations. They're not the doers. So they often shout this mantra, my success will be working myself out of a job. I think many of us probably feel that way too. Wouldn't we love a world in which our work was unnecessary because lenses of justice and equity were embedded into everything? Every business decision is made through these lenses automatically. I believe we're decades away from that, if not longer. So in the meantime, let's make sure we have positions dedicated to this, work dedicated to this, strategies dedicated to this, concrete, tangible, measurable efforts, and of course, in the meanwhile, try to embed into systems. So I'm helping my clients figure out where are their intervention points in systems and processes throughout their organizations where they can create this one thing a little bit more equitably and have influence. And my clients are tired from doing this. The average tenure of a chief DEI officer in corporate America is like 2 to 3 years right now. And it's mostly Black women in these roles. And that's these people, these leaders, these humans are exhausted from shouldering this burden, this trauma, this constant marginalization within their own organizations and bringing an aspect of their identity to their work that many other people do not have to bring in the work that they do day to day. So I'm helping them as humans as much as I am helping them as leaders and as influencers. And if they can change 5 processes and then they have to leave and take a break and move on to the next organization, again, that is success. So that's the lens that I try to take with systems change, because that is the legacy. If we can change a few systems and processes in one of these huge corporations, then that is immensely impactful for not only the workers, but also the customers, the business partners, all of those ecosystems in which a business lives.
Beautiful, thanks. Aviva?
I mean, I can piggyback on that. I love what Devon shared. And I think like as we think about something as daunting as disrupting a system, it feels really hard. And what he said is the right way in. It starts with the leader. So at Bridgespan, and I think what you heard with Blue Garnet as well, is that we work with the leaders of organizations. And the biggest part of our impact is in helping to influence how that leader thinks about their work and the work of their organization. So whether that's on their strategy, how are you investing your money, what are the types of actions you're taking to actually advance impact, to even like designing their organization. I'm working right now with a large client to restructure an organization and incorporate like really basic business practices like single point accountability for decision making and having clear decision roles and figuring out like what are the key management forums we need to actually come together and make decisions together. Like all of these tools are really helpful to make organizations more impactful, but it starts with the leader. And a lot of times the leader, as consultants, we can just bring an outside-in perspective. So we can push them. We can ask good questions. We don't have to know everything about the specific topic that they know, but we are advisors and we can help them to push their own thinking. We can act as devil's advocates and we can help them to see impact in a new and different way.
Nice, that's so great. I'll go back to, I'll give an example, but I'll go back first to how we work with organizations, just because, on social impact consulting, I think, what exactly do you do? Like we've been talking for how many minutes? Like my parents are like, what do you do? So I like to think of it as how we work with leaders and their teams is, for us, we customize a process and then we help them with content. Okay, so there's a process, you have content, so you have strategic questions that you are asking at this moment in time as leaders. And then how do you engage the right people in the right way at the right time? And there's an increasing awareness of DEI issues, and yet you still need decision makers. Right? So how do we have inclusivity and still have clear decision making? Right? So there's process and content, and that's how we work with them, is to figure out what are the questions you're asking, how do you answer that so what question, and then what's the process that is participatory in nature, is inclusive by design, and really tackles some of the big elephants in the room. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about some trends later, but there are some big elephants in the room when you try to do that with a team. But let me turn to the systems change and give you an example, a little different example than systems change. I love what you're doing. But this is, there was a homeless service provider in a local community, and they had started like 30 years ago because one guy said, there's homeless people in our community, and I'm just gonna start handing out sandwiches because they are hungry. We're gonna meet them where they are and provide basic needs. Awesome. Years later, then they're like, we'll provide showers, and now we'll provide groceries, so meeting the basic needs. And then over time, they said, well, now we need to provide transitional housing, and over time, then it was permanent housing. So now, decades later, this is before Blue Garnet got to work with them, they had a new CEO who says, you know, homelessness is really a systemic issue, and it's a regional problem. So here we are, one organization, and we're good at what we do, but how do we become a leader in helping to solve homelessness for this region? And I had worked with her at another organization. She said, Jenny, can you please come in? I'm like, yes, systems change. Like, yes, this is the type of work that we want to do because it has a lasting impact. It's a collective effort. But imagine the board who was made up of founding board members, staff who had been doing this basic needs work for a long time. They had to go through a change process. They're like, systems what? What? Like, what is our sweet spot and what is our core competency today is not what it needs to be in the future. And the difference between what we are today and the future, it's painful. It's a change process to get through. And so it's really exciting, though, to see leaders take on a systems view and then come alongside them and say, yes, this change is hard, but gosh, imagine. So one of the new competencies, skills they needed to develop was collaboration, communications, government relations. And so that was a really exciting project to be able to help them achieve that.
Perfect. What great and diverse examples of that, of your experiences in intersection with systems work. And I too have found in my work, in my consulting work, there isn't a strategic plan that doesn't address something around the underlying upstream root causes that are holding this issue in place, and just rich opportunities around systems work, which I will say a year from now, maybe we'll be offering a class on systems change here at Anderson, because it really is the future of solving those major problems that are being held in place by our racist, unjust systems. So a few more questions. I'll just give you a heads up of where we're going to spend the last few minutes. We want to talk a little bit about trends that we're seeing in the social impact space, and a little bit about career advice, if you have that for our audience, and then we'll open it up for just a few questions. So what are some major trends that you're seeing?
You want to start? I feel like Devon should start. You should start.
Major trends. I think one trend that I'm seeing is along the lines of what I was sharing previously. My clients are not buying social impact work or equity work. They're buying business work with a lens of social impact or equity. So they're looking for how they can meet and exceed their business goals by also making the world a better place. If I can build a feature in this app that will make my user experience more accessible to people with disabilities, for example, that's also going to help me capture a new market. I see dollar signs, and I'm also creating accessibility. So that's really the trend I'm seeing. I'm not having any conversation with the client just through the lens of how can we make the world a better place, unfortunately. And so it's paired with that. I'm also seeing in my field particularly, if you think of the thousands of things that Deloitte offers to corporations, in my field particularly, we are facing competition from the Bridgespans and the Blue Garnets, but also boutique one-person shops more than pretty much any other. I think we need a systems-based ecosystem approach for social impact consulting as well. I think we best succeed when we work with a minority-owned business as a systems thinker or a leading scholar in a specific area, and we're bridging Deloitte's global massive breadth of expertise with technical depth, because I am not an expert in every aspect of equity or ESG or sustainability. I can never be, I will never be, but we can pull in experts in those spaces. So I'm relying on academic research, I'm relying on also other specific consultants in those spaces. So I think that's an increasing trend. The recognition that this requires a group solution, collective, and we don't have to compete. I said competitors, but if I lose $50,000 of my sale to a queer, Black-owned business, for example, then I see that as a net good to the world, and Deloitte can be okay with the loss of $50,000. It'll do better ultimately for the client and the world.
Nice. Aviva, what are you seeing?
I mean, Devon really said it well. I think the key trend we've really been seeing is a focus on embracing racial equity, and particularly moving toward being an anti-racist organization, not just racial equity. And that the way in to get there is this topic of systems change that we've been talking about so much. So happy to share more, but those are the two key ones.
Jenny, do you want to add something?
Let me back off of that. I'd say just a very practical trend that I see is organizations that have done DEI work and now, can you help us with our strategic plan? Right? Like, so here's our plan, and sometimes the boards are like, what did we do? Do we have a DEI plan? And now they're like, now embedded into strategy, as opposed to kind of thinking of it as a kind of how we work, I don't know, it's just very, one thing we're seeing.
I guess I would add also, Aviva and I were talking a little bit about the increase in interest in climate work from our clients. So this broader trend of ESG, environmental social governance, this investor-created framework for investors to assess the non-financial impacts of a business, of an organization, has led organizations in the pressure that they're receiving from the investor community and other stakeholders, including their workers and their customers and regulators and activists, has led them to realize, okay, so if I'm going to disclose a report on all of these metrics, this increasing laundry list of metrics about not only my carbon footprint, but the attrition of my people by race and ethnicity, and on, it's hundreds of things now that organizations could report on. In order to feel good about the data that I'm reporting, I want to make sure I have good programs, initiatives, and strategies behind that data. And so I'd say that's the other lever that I'm seeing a lot is, oh shoot, I'm being required to, or receiving a lot of pressure to report on projects, initiatives, but also data. In ESG, mature ESG programs establish quantifiable forward-looking goals. So I'm going to achieve X in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. And if I'm going to commit to that, I better have a strategy behind that. So we're having a lot of conversations right now also about how ESG is creating this pressure. And there's a ton of debate about woke capitalism. And my clients, for many of which are the first time, are being thrown into this political discourse. And they're like, oh, politics, we're a corporation. We don't want to get involved in politics. But now we can't disentangle it. Mm-hmm. So my clients and Deloitte now is having to face this really nuanced and complex conversation about politicization of just doing good things. Mm-hmm. Like, why should it be political that we want attrition rates to be the same for all people of different races and ethnicities? For some reason it is, and we have to have a debate about it. Again, simple human dignity and respect. But ESG, the framework, the push for data and disclosure, is pushing us in the right direction. And so a lot of clients are asking us for that.
I think of it as the carrot and the stick, right? The stick, I'm so happy that there's that push. And the carrot is the leaders themselves saying we want to do better. Mm-hmm. And figuring, that's part of the system, is that you need both of those things. Yeah. I have two trends that we haven't talked about that might be relevant to students because you can use your skills on these trends, and then two trends that aren't trends, but I want them to be trends.
Awesome.
So the first trend is just this overwhelm of data. There's a key opportunity in the skill of making meaning out of data. And it's not just visualization skills. It's really helping to we need more data detectives. There's a book called Data Detective. I highly recommend it. So that's the first trend. And then the second trend is a focus on the whole person as part of leadership development. And so the key opportunity here, I hope you all have taken your HR classes, and it's one of the best classes I ever took when I was in business school, really thinking about people and culture and organizations as systems. So the key opportunity is to consider work well-being as you define organizational sustainability. People like to talk about, can we do it in a sustainable way, therefore means financially. But it also means about people. And so increasingly there's discussion and discourse around work well-being. From a practical perspective at Blue Garnet, we find ourselves coaching leaders through this in how their org sustainability is related to their individual sustainability. thinking about the human factor. We are not robots doing this work. We are humans, right? And so what is a reasonable work week, right? Nonprofit leaders, I mean, they work, it's a grind, right? And so sometimes I'm with boards and I have the privilege to get them to think about organizational sustainability in a different way and think about the people side.
Nice.
Yeah, and okay, here's the 2 trends that I hope will come. One is with all these requirements with regulations that we go from output to impact. Mm-hmm. So much of the reporting is output. How many jobs were created? How many people attended this? It's good. It's an indication of volume. Track it. But that is not your impact.
Yep.
And then the second one is a focus on the success and impact of the organization, not a laundry list of programs. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I say it's still a wish is because this trend is slow in forming. In fact, back in the mid-90s, 1990s, that is 30 years ago, one of my Ford Foundation projects was they were piloting general operating support for civil rights organizations. And I got to work on that. General operating support, what is that? It's still a question in our sector because so much of funding is programmatic in nature, right? I met a leader of an organization that says, I have 14 program logic models, right? And yet I have to answer these questions about, what is our impact, which they're really asking for output. But how do we help organizations? This is where the MBA comes in. How do you help organizations be able to articulate what is our success and develop organizational performance to achieve it repeatedly, at scale, and effectively?
Nice.
Right? Like that's literally, so I want that to be a trend. It has to happen as a carrot and stick. It has to happen from the funding side to stop those bad practices, of like, here's like 5% for your overhead. What is Deloitte's overhead? Is it 5% of your budget? No, it is not.
We'll have a sidebar.
Yeah.
Okay, so the overhead myth.
Yeah.
The nonprofit starvation cycle. Yes.
I'm hoping that this group of leaders here can help make those 2 trends, moving from output to impact, and really thinking about organizational success and performance and how we invest in the ones that are doing real work that is lasting.
Wonderful. The word sustainable coming back again, which means much more than environmental sustainability, organizational, financial, environmental, and impact sustainability. Great. So 1 sentence each of you, career advice. If somebody is interested in the social impact consulting space, what would you recommend that they do, that they be, that they think about?
I'm trying to boil it down to one.
I know, that's why I said
okay,
one
sentence. Please ask and answer the question of why social impact consulting and when in your life, because there are real trade-offs to choose this path.
Great. Excellent.
Force yourself to make choices. Create enough opportunities where you have to choose between multiple paths. That will help clarify your values and your path.
That's good.
Don't be scared of it, and build and keep your community close by.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, let's take a few minutes and a few questions from all of you. Hopefully we touched on a lot of topics that were of interest, and I will let Mike run around with the mic.
Thank you guys so much for your comments. Coming from a background of government foreign policy, diplomacy overseas, where you understand that you're trying to do systems change in a level and in an environment where, unless you're the US government, you play a very small role at a specific period of time, and you have a very unique moment or window to try to move and act. And there are moments where that impact you envisioned, you're going to see pushback from all the opponents or competitors in the sector. There's been a lot of work being done in response to the social impact work over the last decade, political, legal, jurisprudential, capitalistic, that is pushing back on some of the ideals and visions of social impact. So do you guys see, as a part of your consulting practice or role or this sector, thinking in the way a diplomat or anyone else would, that you need to use some game theory to plot out where the space is moving and how to counsel clients, firms to adjust in that type of competitive environment where values have not necessarily been clearly agreed to.
I'd love to start.
Wow.
That's a great question. What I'm going to suggest, we're just going to have one response to
Okay.
each question
Okay.
so we can get more questions
Okay,
in.
I'll
So
take this
Aviva,
one.
you're going to represent us.
All of systems change work is long. So when you embrace a focus on systems change, you get rid and let go of the near term. Martin Luther King said, we must take 2 steps forward and then we take 1 step back. And that is how history happens and how evolution happens over time, and the journey is long. So you have to be willing to forgo the fear of the instantaneous short-term measurement and embrace the long-term goal that you're working toward.
Nice, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. It was very interesting. I have a question. So you're creating solutions for these diverse communities, and a lot of the nonprofits you're working with are working with like niche communities that have very specific experiences and problems. So I was wondering, as you go from project to project, what strategies do you use to really understand the needs of the communities that you're going to be serving before you start to create solutions for those communities?
I'll take this one.
Yeah, sure. We typically start off with a discovery period where we are kind of getting up to speed, but also assessing where they are today. It's hard to plan for the future if you don't take an honest look of where you are today. And I'll tell you, most of our clients don't want to fund that piece, but it is so vital in order to really come up with strategies. And part of it is having the patience and dedicating resources to what I mentioned before, participatory engagement. I think in the for-profit space, we think of market research as competitive intelligence, as obviously, that's how we know what we're doing. But in the nonprofit space, unfortunately, and in philanthropy, it's kind of, that's a spend that we don't have money for, market research, right? And so I would say it's vital. In fact, I am working with a network of public schools right now. We started in January of last year. You know, we were going to, and we wanted to do focus groups and just sit and listen to community. And they were like, we don't have time for that. We gotta keep moving. We gotta do this plan and get our budget done by the next budget cycle. You know, well, guess what? That didn't happen because the board was just not able or ready to adopt a strategy. And so we had to just pause, be flexible, and we said, we really think it's time to do this community engagement. Can we please? And they said, okay. And it was transformational. And guess what? The community had a very different idea of what should be the strategy. What, in fact, not only the strategy in the future, but they had a different idea of what this organization was about. Yeah. The very essence on a day-to-day basis of what they are about and what they are creating was not how the board and others were talking about it. So that discovery is vital, and sometimes we have to fight with our clients we have to advocate for why it is so important and where the return on that investment is.
I'll add to that too, Rashi. Thanks for the question. I think part of it is seeing ourselves not as the ones solving the problems, but creating the process and the place and the culture for these community members to solve their own problems.
Yes. Yeah.
I think we have another question.
Hello. I have a language question. So I run a social media agency with a DEI focus, and I am pitching an accessibility arm to Goldman Sachs. And on Wednesday, when I gave them my statement, I got 6 comments that said, "What is DEI?" And so that was really enlightening to me. And so I kind of want to ask, what kind of language and messaging do you use to get this type of message across, to not scare people away or make them feel, I really do, I think they're uncomfortable with that conversation. So advice on language and messaging.
Well, I'm pretty sure Devon can answer to that one.
I had a feeling.
I'm pretty sure he's not worried about scaring people away.
When I started at Deloitte, I got slapped on the wrist for saying that all humans have bias, because by saying all humans have bias, that means that you, as leaders at this company, including at Deloitte, have bias. And that is a legal risk, because then if we're biased, then we're prone to discriminatory actions potentially. We've advanced a lot since then, fortunately. I'm now allowed to say all humans have bias. There is an evolution going, though. So we have made progress on concepts and words like equity, oppression, privilege, and we've even evolved the name of our practice from D&I to DEI, and now we're really centering on the concept of equity as an outcome. My goal is always to stay a half step ahead of my clients, actually. So I want to continue to push them, but not be so out of sight that they're not able to process and see and reconcile and reflect on what I'm putting in front of them. And that differs from human to human. Sometimes I have to remind my teams who are junior professionals who are entering the corporate world as social activists, much like I am, and they see corporations as these conglomerate entities that make decisions. And I remind them that corporations are comprised of individual humans, each along their own journey in education and self-reflection. And to call a straight white man leader at most of the world's organizations someone who has privilege or who has contributed to oppression and trauma, that is a lot. They've never had to think about those things. So you're confronting something very personal in a corporate setting that hasn't often given space for us to think about, reflect on those personal things. If I'd been in the working world 20 years ago, where I am now, I'm a gay man with 2 kids via surrogacy. I probably wouldn't talk about those things. I now see it as part of my moral obligation to tell my story. It's part of my activism, but I probably would not have done that a few decades ago. So there is change happening. I'm glad you got those reactions, because that means there were some aha moments and maybe some learning that's happening. It's every single one of those instances that makes a difference.
Great.
And I just said, we are ambassadors, I think, to help whoever comes into our lives kind of along this journey. And so I would, meet folks where they are and say, oh, great, thank you for asking that question. Well, actually, people define it differently. Let me talk about each one of the, is it DEI? Is it DEIJ? Like every organization has its own, equity is actually an outcome, I think. Inclusivity and diversity is a part of how you get there, so it's just it's a great opportunity. In your mind, you're like, oh, okay. That's okay. Just meet folks where they are.
Yeah, the lack of harmonization of language in all of our fields is a huge problem, actually. So it is ever evolving. The lexicon is different from country to country, region to region, field to field. And so we're not all talking about the same things when we use the same words. And that goes across all sustainability topics. So we just have to accept the messiness.
Mm-hmm. So with that, I think we have to wrap up. I appreciate being able to take a few more minutes of your time to listen to these brilliant impact leaders. And I think now you can get a sense, as I said at the beginning, of how rich their experience is, their expertise, their humility. So really, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.